this house. So the Rangers came in and bombed this house for 45 minutes and actually killed or wounded 200 people. About 80 people were killed and a large number of people were wounded, and they took them away in wheelbarrows, and then the Marines came down on ropes and they actually shot many of the people who were surviving. And there were women and children among the wounded and the dead. So it was a really tragic, horrible situation, especially considering.
And that's something they call collateral damage, but it was, from the other side of it, that doesn't feel like collateral damage to people whose families are being killed. Exactly. It's quite different. It's a direct attack.
Yeah, it's really heartbreaking.
So that's the context.
So Dan, who had been brought up in Africa, who loved the Somalis, who were not always easy.
And spoke Swahili and the local language.
And he could communicate with the Somalis as well. Dan and the other journalists were in the Al Sahafi Hotel, which means the journalist hotel, and they were up on the roof photographing what was happening. And the survivors ran to the hotel and said, please, please come, you've got a photograph of what's happened, and tell the world. So reluctantly, actually, they went because it was so very dangerous, but they were promised that they would be safe by the survivors. And they went across town in a convoy. And when they arrived, they started shooting the pictures. And the people were so angry that the crowd became a mob, and the mob attacked the journalists, and 4 of them were stoned to death. Including Dan, at the age of 22.
Yes.
So it was that I learned.
And where were you when you got, and how soon between the time he was killed and you got the message, how much time lapsed, and then what was your immediate, what was you just telling me?
I was in a hotel in California. I was shooting a film, actually, and we were doing the post-production in California. And I was awakened with this news. And I mean,
always in the night, isn't it?
Is it crazy how that happens?
Always come in the night, always.
But I imagine, virtually everybody here has had just horrible news that has devastated and shifted our axis, shifted our lives completely. And I knew, a couple of months before, there was a young aid worker who was killed in Somalia, Sean Devereaux. And I'll never forget, I was watching the BBC, I lived in London then, and I saw his mother on television, and she was so poised and so amazingly wonderful. And I remember at the time thinking, I could never be like that. I mean, God, I hope nothing happens so I never have to even try. But I knew right after Dan was killed that my life I was very conscious of the fact that my life would shift. It was a strange situation. And in times of shock, we become very composed. And then you become hysterical. And I remember trying to tear the curtains down in the hotel. I mean, I literally was banging on the walls and trying to tear it down. And then I was very, very calm. And there were newspapers and television people and interviewing me. But it was...
Someone interviewed you and you said, I'd like to see myself 5 years from now and see where I'm at. And actually that same journalist, was it Wendy?
Yeah, Wendy Jewell.
Wendy Jewell wrote about that. And I hope you all looked that up too. And what a transformation.
Yeah.
Go on. I mean, how long did it take you to shift your focus really from yourself, if I'm not saying that, outwardly, to reinvest, or at least, I don't know if you were consciously thinking, I need to channel my grief, or it was a natural, it just kind of evolved, and you didn't have a choice.
What happened with me is, at the memorial service, we had this amazing celebration of life on the Ngong Hills, if you've ever seen Out of Africa.
Yes.
The Ngong Hills was where we had this grand celebration, I mean, it was sky and earth, and lots of Maasai warriors, and people from all over the world would come out to this place. And I saw the head of Reuters, the editor-in-chief, Mark Wood, and I ran over to him and I said, Mr. Wood, we have to transform this tragedy into something positive. We have to tell the world about journalists, who risk their lives.
Absolutely.
And at that point, that was the worst tragedy of journalistic history. There were 4 people who were killed. So he said, I will do everything I can to help. So that was my salvation, and I think I was lucky because I had material to work with. I had these journalists and their challenges.
Well, and you had a massive network, including film.
Yeah.
And we can talk about that in a minute, but go ahead.
Well, initially, I started working with AP and Reuters, and we did a big exhibition of the work of the dead journalists in London. And we did a book called Images of Conflict within 6 weeks of Dan's death.
That's amazing.
And then at Duke University, Tom Brokaw came and opened a conference, and then Dan Rather opened a conference, and this exhibition traveled around. And I could really focus, you know, gather myself up and be in good shape for whatever the event was, and then I would go and, you know, cry for a couple of
Yes,
weeks.
you have ups and downs.
Yeah, those waves that we get when we're grieving. And in 1997, Amy, who really was...
Amy's your daughter.
Amy, my daughter.
And she's not married now.
Yeah, that's right. Amy and I were it was really, really hard. And at one point she said, Mom, I can't stand this any longer. It was 2 years after Dan was killed. And I looked around, I was in the bedroom, and I saw a dream catcher over my bed. And I said, Amy, I know, you can make an angel catcher. And she said, what's an angel catcher? She was in Boston and very practical. I said, it's a book where you can capture the memories about Dan and, you know, poems and pictures and everything, and one day you can show it to your child and say, this is my Uncle Dan. So Christmas time, she came back with this big book, which she called her Angel Catcher.
Wow.
And we realized this was this is a good idea. So we created a book called Angel Catcher, which I didn't bring along, but I wish I could show you. But it's a guided journal that it's been published by Chronicle. And it was on Oprah, thank goodness.
Oh my goodness, yeah, that makes a difference.
That got it around the world.
That's right.
But it's to help people go through the grieving process and come out the other end, you know, accepting. You may never get over it, but you get through it.
You never get over it, but there's a dark period. You get through it, but on the other side, there is life, even here, and new life, and millions of lives are being changed because of it. Now, I don't know how much time we've got, but I want us to make sure we get to the point where we talk about creative visions, because this has become much larger even than the traveling exhibition. And one of Dan's book, well, the book you pulled together with his artwork, because what is so wonderful is that Dan was not only had a cause, he was so expressive, and no doubt there's a genetic reason for that. It comes straight from you for sure. But he was so expressive, he had to create artifacts that illustrated what he was seeing. And, you know, he lived a full lifetime in about 20 months, 24 months.
He was busy.
Oh, but that book was at the we had a little reception earlier, and I saw that book. If someone has that book, we probably ought to bring it up to the stage so we can have it up here.
Thank you.
We'd
love to
bring that
borrow
up here,
yeah.
because that book is beautiful.
Well, the crazy thing about this book is that we put it together in 1997. It's sold to like 200,000 copies, I guess. But one person saw it who was a guy named Danny Moder. And some of you may know Danny Moder. He is actually the husband of Julia Roberts. And he got Julia interested in the book. And it's a collection of journal pages. And all we did was to photograph the journal pages exactly as they were, and then just put them in the book. And this was the first book. And then there was a second book called Dan Eldon, The Art of Life. And then there's a third book coming out. And then there was a first documentary. And then there was a second documentary. And now we're actually making a feature film about Dan. And the crazy thing is, and this is really crazy, is Julia Roberts is playing me. And I
wow.
See, I got
well, there's
laugh.
a resemblance.
I totally got a laugh. There's no resemblance. But she is, and what's particularly funny is that in the old days, you know, when people would, because I've tried to make this film for years.
And by the way, Daniel
Radcliffe, yeah.
who played in
Harry Potter.
He is Harry Potter, you all know. The young people know that, sure. Will be playing Dan.
Yeah. So that's hilarious too.
Yeah.
Dan would not be approving of it because Daniel Radcliffe's only about 5'2".
Oh yeah, and how tall was he?
He was nearly 6 feet.
Well, at least they're both named Dan.
Yeah, they're named, and Daniel Radcliffe is lovely. But Julia found out about this project. So we got to know each other. She lives down the road, and she's really a lovely person. And what was exciting is that we started conjuring up another project, which is the power of mothers to change the world.
Wow.
And we're calling it Moms on a Mission, and we're doing it with the Oprah Winfrey Network.
Oh, wow.
And it's going to be their biggest thing next year. They're launching in January, the Oprah Winfrey Network, and that's going to be like the big thing that they launch with. And we're going to have like 30 million moms blogging and talking to each other. So it's going to be really incredible. So
that is so
fingers crossed.
Well, there's so much that's happening, and you know, it's so exciting. We see a lot of movie stars and celebrities in the news going to Africa, adopting a child, and certainly, no doubt, they have really good intentions and they really care. How do you see this differently in terms of Julia Roberts' involvement, and not just Julia, Oprah, others? You know, we know about Oprah and her school for girls,
right.
and how much trouble she's had, but also how much joy she's had, and she's trying to make that work.
It's a really good question. You know, on Tuesday of last week, there was in LA a conference called Celebrity Diplomacy, and we were particularly interested. The head of outreach for the UN, Eric Folk, was there, and our whole team was there. We were interested because another project we're doing is called Star Power, People Power, and it's.
Yes, I wanted to get to that.
Yeah,
precisely.
we're doing it with VH1. And